With how crowded the gacha space is right now, it's getting harder and harder for a new game to actually stand out. Most of them try to do that by going bigger, more systems, more mechanics, more complexity layered on top of each other, all in an attempt to feel unique, and sometimes that works, but every now and then you run into something that goes in the opposite direction. Mongil Stardive doesn't really try to reinvent anything. At its core, it's a pretty straightforward experience, a simple fantasy setting, familiar structure, gameplay that doesn't go too deep. On paper is the kind of game you'd expect to blend in rather than stand out. And yet, after spending some time with it, that's not how it felt at all. What it does well isn't complexity, it's how effortlessly it pulls you into its world. It reminded me of something I didn't really expect going into it, not in terms of mechanics, but in how it feels to experience it. That same kind of energy older anime MMORPGs used to have, where the story isn't necessarily groundbreaking, but the characters carry it in a way that makes you want to keep going. So instead of asking whether this game is innovative or not, I think the more interesting question is this: why does something this simple still works? The first thing that stands out about Mongil Stardive, or rather the first thing that might turn people away, is how simple it looks at a glance. The setting is about as classic as it gets. It's your standard fantasy world, the kind you've seen countless times before, with nothing that immediately jumps out as unique or groundbreaking. No unusual twists, no complex world-building hook, nothing that tries to redefine the genre. And in a space like Gacha, where so many games are constantly trying to stand out through originality that can feel like a weakness, I don't think it is. A lot of games aim for something more ambitious when it comes to their setting. They try to build intricate worlds layered with concepts, terminology, and lore that takes time to fully understand. Sometimes that works, other times it ends up making the experience feel heavier than it needs to be, especially early on. Over time, that kind of originality has almost become the standard in gacha storytelling, which creates a strange situation where the more complex settings stop feeling unique and instead just become expected. So when you go back to something much simpler, it doesn't come across as lacking, it feels different in a completely opposite way. Mongil Stardive leans into that simplicity, and more importantly, it understands how to present it. Instead of trying to impress you with scale or complexity, it focuses on making that familiar fantasy world feel easy to step into, almost comforting in how straightforward it is. And the same approach carries over into the story. There's no massive overarching mystery being built up in the background, no complicated narrative thread that takes hours to piece together. What you get instead is a very direct, easy to follow plot that doesn't ask much from you beyond just experiencing it. That might sound like a limitation, but in practice it works in the game's favor. When both the setting and the story stay grounded like this, they stop competing for your attention, they don't get in the way, they don't slow things down, and they don't demand constant effort just to keep up with what's happening. They simply create a space where everything else can shine, and that's where the game starts to feel different. Not because it's doing something new, but because it's deliberately choosing not to. And in a genre where everything is constantly trying to go bigger, that simplicity ends up feeling like a breath of fresh air. There's a kind of nostalgic quality to it, the same feeling older anime style MMORPGs used to have, where the world and the story weren't the main attraction on their own, but they create a perfect backdrop for everything built on top of them. And that's what makes this work. It's not trying to stand out through complexity, it stands out by knowing exactly how simple it needs to be. If the setting and the story are intentionally simple, then something else has to carry the experience. And in Mongil Stardive, that's very clearly the characters. This is where the game stands out the most, and it's also the reason why that simplicity we talked about earlier actually works instead of falling flat. Starting with the protagonists, there's already something unusual here. You have two main characters, which isn't completely unheard of, but the way the game handles them is different. It's not like Zenless Zone Zero where you choose one and the story primarily follows that perspective. Here, there's no choice to be made. Both protagonists exist at the center of the story at the same time, and the narrative treats them as equally important. That might seem like a small detail, but it changes how the story feels. Instead of anchoring everything to a single viewpoint, the dynamic between the two becomes part of the experience itself. It gives the story a bit more movement, a bit more energy, and it avoids that static feeling that a lot of gacha protagonists tends to have. But even beyond that structure, what really makes these characters work is how alive they feel. There's a level of expressiveness here that you don't usually see in this space. The dialogue has personality, the interactions feel natural, and the characters themselves aren't just there to move the plot forward, they actually feel like they exist within the world, and that applies to more than just the main cast. Even the side characters carry the same energy, they're memorable, they're fun to watch, and more importantly, they contribute to the tone of the story instead of fading into the background. That tone is another key part of why this works. A lot of gacha stories lean heavily into high stakes. The world is ending, everything is serious, every moment carries that sense of urgency. That approach can be effective, but it also tends to make everything feel heavier over time. Mongil Stardive takes a different direction. It keeps things lighter, more relaxed, sometimes even comedic, and that shift in tone makes a bigger difference than it might seem at first. The story becomes easier to engage with, the characters have more room to breathe, and the experience as a whole feels more enjoyable moment to moment. And when you combine that with everything else, the simple setting, the straightforward plot, and the characters that are actually enjoyable to spend time with, you start to see why this works as well as it does. At that point, the story doesn't need complexity, the characters carry it on their own. Now, when it comes to gameplay, this is probably where the game is at its most straightforward. If you're going into Mongil Stardive expecting deep combat systems, complex mechanics, or a lot of variety in how you approach the game, you're probably not going to find that here. Everything about it is simple. The combat doesn't try to do anything particularly complex, the structure is instance-based rather than open world, and the missions themselves are very direct. There isn't much in terms of mechanical depth, and the game doesn't really push you to master anything beyond the basics. At a glance, that can easily come across as a weakness, but in the context of everything we talked about earlier, I don't think it is. This isn't trying to be that kind of game in the first place. The experience it offers is much more laid back, it's the kind of game you play when you don't want to overthink things, when you just want to move through the story, spend time with the characters, and enjoy the world without constantly being challenged by systems and demand your full attention. And the gameplay supports that. It stays out of the way. Even the option to lower the difficulty reinforces that idea, not because the combat is particularly hard to begin with, but because the game clearly understands that not everyone is here for that. It gives you the choice to move through encounters faster, to focus on experience rather than the mechanics. That same philosophy shows up in how it handles side content. Instead of overwhelming you with a long list of side quests, the game keeps things relatively light. There aren't that many of them, and more importantly, they don't take a huge amount of time to complete. That might sound like a limitation, but in practice it makes them more enjoyable. Each one feels more focused, more intentional, and often more tied to the characters themselves rather than just being filler content. Even something as simple as the love potion quest stands out, not because it's complex, but because it's short, character driven, and genuinely fun to go through. It leaves you wanting to see more, rather than feeling like something you have to push through. And that's a big difference. A lot of games treat side content as something you invest hours into, often at the cost of pacing and engagement. Here it feels like something that complements the main experience instead of competing with it. So yes, the gameplay isn't the strongest part of the game. It's not meant to be. What matters is that it understands its role and it supports everything else instead of getting in the way. And in a game like this, that's exactly what it needs to do. At the end of the day, Mongil Stardive wasn't even on my radar until recently. I didn't go into it with any real expectations. If anything, I saw it as something I'd play casually for a while, just a small distraction until the next big release comes along. But that's not how it ended up feeling. The more time I spent with it, the more I realized that the appeal doesn't come from any single standout feature. It's not trying to impress you with scale, complexity, or innovation. It's not competing in the same way a lot of other gacha games are. Instead, it focuses on something much simpler. And more importantly, it understands exactly how to make that work. After spending time with so many games that lean heavily into layered storytelling, intricate systems, and long-term narrative setups, this feels like a step in the opposite direction, a lighter experience, one that doesn't demand as much from you and doesn't try to overwhelm you just to prove its depth. And that's exactly why it works. The setting stays simple, the story stays easy to follow, the gameplay stays out of the way, and all of that creates a space for the characters and the overall tone to carry the experience. It's not trying to be everything at once, it just knows what it wants to be. And in a genre where so many games are constantly trying to push further, add more, and do bigger things, there's something refreshing about one that chooses to stay focused instead. That's what makes it stand out, because it understands how to make something simple feel genuinely enjoyable. So overall, Mongil Stardive is probably not going to be the game for everyone. If you're looking for something deep, something complex, something that constantly challenges you with its systems or its storytelling, this isn't really trying to be that. But if what you want is something lighter, something you can just sit down with and enjoy without overthinking every part of it, then it does that surprisingly well. And honestly, that's what caught me off guard the most. I went into this with almost no expectation, and yet I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would. But I'm curious what you think about it. Have you tried the game yet? And if you have, did it click for you the same way or did it feel too simple? Let me know in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps out the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.